So part of what I'm going to talk about today is a little intro about who I am and where I come from and why it is that I do what I do. Some of that was just taken care of, so that's easier. I'm going to try and also work on keeping us on time. Those of you who came to the Dogma Debate radio show last night may have already heard some of what I'm going to say today. Please don't hold that against me. But good morning. Welcome to Apostacon. Let's thank the coordinators, everybody for putting this together. The amazing volunteers. Thank you guys so much. So did everybody come out to see Dr. Tyson last night? It was awesome. And I hope you'll all also come out today to see Lawrence Krauss, the keynote speaker. It's going to be amazing. So thank you for waking up early to come spend some time with me this morning. I do my talks generally a little bit differently than most. I personally don't fancy myself a TED talker, and I don't think I'm all that good at working with PowerPoint, so I don't use one. So we're just going to have a chat. I much prefer to do it that way, a more intimate conversation, and I'm going to try and leave as much time as possible at the end for Q&A. I'd much rather talk with you than talk at you. So a little bit of intro, some background, and then we'll open it up. The title of my talk, which was came together with a lot of help from Sarah Moorhead, actually, is Out and Proud as a Latter-day Sinner. So what I want to talk to you about today, generally speaking, I am a science communicator, as Victor told you. And usually when I give public talks, I talk about science. I talk about some of the science that I used to do, and now I talk about kind of why science literacy is important and women in STEM and a lot of those kinds of issues. I'm actually really excited to be talking to you guys today, this kind of different audience, because I get to talk about my atheism instead. And so some science will come out along the way, I can't help it. But I really want to focus on my fall from grace. So let's see. Yeah. So you know, just to give you a little bit of background, Victor gave you some of that. I grew up in North Texas, and when I was in school, I did study neuroscience. I actually didn't find science, though, until I was in college. I started my undergrad with an intention of studying vocal jazz performance. I was a jazz singer in high school. And I ended up studying psychology instead because I thought it would be easy. I did a psych undergrad and with a philosophy minor. Along the way, as I was studying psychology, I started working with a clinical neuropsychologist, and that's where a lot of my research into blindness started to happen. I decided to go back to school after I did my undergrad and get a master's degree in neurobiology, and that's when I was studying cell culture techniques and a little bit of Parkinson's research. And then I moved to New York, and I started a PhD in clinical neuropsychology. While I was in New York, I realized how much more fun I was having teaching science classes versus doing bench work in the lab. And I made a really hard decision that I would leave my PhD program and I would start doing more public science communication, because I thought that that's where my talents really lied, and I thought that I would have a more fulfilled life doing it that way. I've been very lucky that I've had a lot of great media opportunities. So, as was mentioned before, I used to work for the Huffington Post. I started working there when Ariana came to me and said, I want to launch a science page. Now, previous to that, the Huffington Post did not have a science page, and they were not well known for their science coverage. And so I really wanted to be a part of changing the way that that publication looked at science. And I'm proud to say that now, if you go to HuffPost Science, it's definitely a different place than the health pages and the environment pages and some of the pages where you found a lot of the woo that existed before. So while I was there, I did a video series called Talk Nerdy to Me. Some of you may have seen some of those videos. I had a lot of fun while I was doing that. And later, I became a co-host of a show called Take Part Live, which still happens, still takes place on Pivot TV. They've changed it. It's gone a little bit more political. But at the time, it was a fun new show that was kind of politics and civil justice and current events from a millennial perspective. Now I work I have 2 regular jobs that I contribute to. So if you live in Southern California, which I'm sure many of you do not, I contribute to a show called SoCal Connected, which is on KCET, which used to be the PBS affiliate there. I also work on a national news show called Techno, which is on Al Jazeera America, and there I contribute to really fun science stories. And my other real passion is that I do a podcast called Talk Nerdy. I was lucky enough to interview David Silverman yesterday for the podcast. So if you're into podcasts, you'll be able to hear that episode soon. And today I am supposed to be interviewing Lawrence Krauss. I don't think he's here, but let's put pressure on him to. Oh, okay. Yeah. So now in a little while, I'm going to talk about why I have kind of switched paths a little bit in my career and why I've been focusing not just on science, but on things like politics and social justice. But before that, I kind of want to talk about how I got to where I am at a deeper level, about, like I said, my fall from grace. So I was born and raised in Plano, Texas. Plano is a suburb outside of Dallas. It's not a small suburb. It's actually a really large suburb. It's a pretty affluent suburb. And Mormonism is strong within it. It's right in the heart of the Bible Belt. Many of you grew up in the heart of the Bible Belt as well. But can I get a show of hands out here? How many of you either were raised in the LDS church or have family members that were raised in the LDS church? Okay, so talking to you two. No. Jesus was Mormon. That's crazy. All right, so there are going to be some things that I say that you'll kind of get more than others. It'll be similar to my experience when I went to see the Book of Mormon when they played in L.A. My boyfriend at the time took me for my birthday, and he was like, "You were laughing at stuff that I did not understand." It's like, yeah, there was a lot of that. So when I was growing up, I have a lot of different memories. I was born into the church. My father and my mother were married actually in Los Angeles, which is strange, and then they moved to Texas to have me and my sister. And it's all that I knew. From the time I was born, I was Mormon. You know, it was that thing that was my life. That was my world. I remember singing songs in primary. I remember singing, "I am a child of God, and he has brought me here, has given me an earthly home with parents kind and dear. Lead me, guide me, walk beside me, help me find the way, teach me all that I may do to live with him someday." And I believed that, I think. I mean, it's all I knew. That's all you know when you're raised in a church. It surrounds you. It's especially in the LDS faith, because those are your friends. That's your family. All the people that you know are also Mormon, and until you really go to public school, you probably haven't met many people who are non-Mormon. Now, both my parents were converts. My father's Italian, Santa Maria. Yes, as an aside, I have a very funny and very religious name for somebody who's an atheist. Very Italian. Cara Santa Maria, right? Cara mia, my dear. That's what it means. Beloved, my dear, Santa Maria. Technically, it translates to Dear Mother of God. I'll take it. But it's also very Southern, because once you insert my middle name, all of a sudden I go from Cara Santa Maria to Cara Louise. Get down here, Cara Louise. So I was on Dogma Debate last night, and a lot of different questions were asked about being raised Mormon. And it started to spark a lot of different memories that I decided to kind of shift gears and talk about a little bit today. The first really weird one was this concept of tithing. So if you were there last night, you heard about this. Now, I think most religious folks tithe in some way or another, whether it's passing around a collection plate, donating what they see fit. Now, in the Mormon Church, it's a little bit more regimented. Your folks are expected to have tithing settlements every month. They go in with the bishop. They literally look at your paycheck stubs. Yeah. And 10% of your income goes to the church. And that wasn't spared on us young kids. I remember having a piggy bank, I'm not even kidding, that had a 10% slot for my tithing, and 90% went to my savings. And yeah, so even as a child, I apologize, you guys, I was funding like legislation pushing against Prop 8. It was terrible. I didn't know. And I also have this really vivid memory of Sunday morning services. Every Sunday, or every first Sunday of the month, was a Sunday that we would fast. And the idea was you take the food that you would have eaten for breakfast and lunch, and you take the amount of money that you would have spent on that food and donate it to charity, which is a great thought. I mean, it's something we could all do. We don't have to be Mormon to do it. But along with that fast came a bearing of your testimony, which was, and those of you who have never, okay, so 2 of you, it looked like in the audience, were raised Mormon or have family members that are Mormon. Have any of you ever visited a Mormon service before? Okay, so a few more of you are aware of what church is like. It takes up a lot of your time, first of all. When you're raised in the Mormon Church, it's 3 hours every Sunday. It's 2 hours of youth group every Wednesday. It's an hour of seminary before school every day, 6 a.m., in my cheerleading uniform, going to seminary to learn Bible and Book of Mormon study. Great fun. So the Mormon Church is a little bit different than a lot of other churches because there's no pastor. It's there's a bishop, and it's a very patriarchal system like most Christian religions. But it's a much more communal service. So the 3 hours of church on Sunday, the first hour includes sacrament and generally talks from the congregation. So there's kind of a rotating volunteer basis where you go up and give talks. But on the first Sunday of every month, you bear your testimony. Now, what that means is that, of your own volition, you go up to the front and you stand in front of the pulpit and you tell some sob story about why you still believe in God. And now little kids would do it too. We felt kind of pressure from our parents, and it was really funny because every little kid did the same thing. You would go up there. I'd like to bear my testimony. I know the church is true. I love my mom and dad. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen. Every kid, same exact script. So really, there you go, exactly. So obviously there was a lot of truth to that. We really felt the Holy Spirit, which is why we said the exact same thing every time. And this is a common facet of being raised in the church, I think, is that there's a lot of social pressure to conform. I'm sure most people in this room experience that. But the Mormon Church also had its fun perks, like another strong memory I have is of this painting of Jesus. And every time you would walk by this painting of Jesus, he would look at you no matter where in the room you were sitting. And I remember this painting really vividly because it wasn't in the church, it was in the temple. Now, I didn't get married in the church. I didn't get sealed in the church. I never wore garments. I never wore the magic underwear because I left when I was very young. But there's one thing that you get to do in the temple when you're a kid if you get your temple recommend, and that's baptize dead people. It's a really weird experience. So, and my father at the time, obviously, my father had the priesthood. Most adult men in the church have the priesthood. Women, oh, no, you don't have the priesthood. But my father had the priesthood, so my father was the one performing the baptisms with me. And I remember going to the temple. Oh, the first thing you get to do when you go to the temple is get a temple recommend. That's a really fun experience for a 12-year-old girl. You go and you sit down with your bishop. And your bishop asks you really invasive questions like, do you engage in masturbation? Do you engage in heavy petting? And 12, what the hell is heavy petting? I have no idea. And either you truthfully say no or you lie, because otherwise you don't get into the temple. And then you go to the temple, you change into white underwear, you change into these weird white jumpsuits, and all of the kids, about 12 and 13-year-old kids, sit in a row in this room with a huge baptismal font. And there's literally a script printed inside the font on a kind of brass plaque. And you go up, my father stands there like this. I hold onto his arm with one hand, plug my nose with the other. And he reads the script, something along the lines of, I, Fred Santa Maria, in the name of Jedediah Smith, do baptize thee. Dunks you under the water. But then you're not done because they do 10 in a row. They need to be efficient. And that's a weird concept in the church. It's a concept that somehow if you didn't have the opportunity to accept Jesus in life and you're hanging in some sort of purgatory state, that we can go ahead and do it for you to free you so that then you can climb the ranks. And by climb the ranks, I mean there's like a ranking system in heaven. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. I think one of the first kind of painful memories that I had being raised in the church, and one of the first things that really made me question the LDS faith specifically, was that when I was 7 years old, my parents got divorced. That wasn't the painful memory. That was a huge relief. Yeah. But when I was 11 years old, I think around then, maybe 9, maybe 11, my father got remarried, and he married a Mormon woman who had 2 children, my stepsisters, who were wonderful. And I remember trying to work through the logistics of how marriages and being sealed in the temple works in the LDS faith. And to the best of my knowledge, as a naive 11-year-old, when my father and his wife got divorced, and then my father remarried this woman, they were now sealed together for all eternity, which means that they were going to go to the celestial kingdom, the highest kingdom of heaven. The way the kingdoms of heaven work, we've got celestial, we've got telestial, we've got terrestrial, is that there's kind of like a one-way valve in these kingdoms. So if you're in the celestial kingdom, you can visit anyone else. You've got all this, you've got like a Eurail pass. You're totally okay to go wherever you want. And you get to hang out with Jesus and God and you know, bask in their glory. Now, if you're like in the telestial kingdom, which means you're in heaven, but it's like heaven on earth and it's kind of crap, you don't get to visit anybody in the celestial kingdom. Well, my mom was no longer sealed to my dad. My mom was no longer married, and my mom was no longer allowed to go to the celestial kingdom. So I, as an 11-year-old girl, am being told by my elders that now I have this new mom that I'm sealed to for all time and eternity. I'm hanging out in like awesome heaven with my dad and this woman I don't know. And I get to go visit my mom when I want, but she's not allowed to visit me. That's a hard thing for a little kid to start processing. Now, along the way, I started to have a lot of other questions, I think more obvious questions, and questions that, let's be honest, I don't think had very much to do with the LDS faith per se, because aren't we really kind of splitting hairs when we talk about it's how much extra crazy? How much extra crazy is the Mormon Church above and beyond any other Judeo-Christian religion? So, you know, at this point I was baptized, as we all know. You know, you can't, well, maybe you don't know, but you can't go to the temple. You can't do any of these things if you're not baptized. I was baptized at the age of 8, because in the Mormon Church, the age of 8 is the age of consent. I do not want to know what historical documents or what was happening with 8-year-olds hundreds of years ago that may be the age of consent. But that's the way that they did it. And at the time, I would rationalize, like, at least I wasn't baptized as a baby. Babies can't make those kinds of decisions for themselves. But at 8, I'm an adult. I know exactly what I'm doing. I should be able to drink. I should be able to drive a car. No, I was 8. What did I want to do at 8 years old? Please my parents. That's why I got baptized. I look back now, I'm not sure if I ever really believed. I was a really precocious kid. I don't remember like losing or finding out that Santa Claus didn't exist. I never had that crisis moment. I don't know if I ever truly believed in Santa Claus. I'm not sure I ever truly believed in God. There are parallels there, obviously. So I was really questioning a lot of, not even Mormon, I think, doctrine, but just religious doctrine. A lot of stuff seemed to not make that much sense. And mind you, this was long before I found science. This is like reasonable, rational stuff that you need no scientific training to see as bullshit. So I went to my father, and I'd been thinking long and hard about this for many years. Now remember, my parents were divorced. My father had his wife and his new family, and my mother at the time, I don't think she was remarried. It was just her. I went to my father at the age of 14, and I said, I don't think I believe in God. I'm living a lie. I don't think I can do this anymore. And he turned to me and said, well, Cara, I have a moral obligation to God as long as you're living under my roof to force you to go to church until you're 18. And as any precocious and rebellious 14-year-old would do, I said, I'm pretty sure I am at an age of consent if we went to a courtroom right now and I talked to a judge. I don't think that that judge would have any problem with me going and living with my mom. Now, I didn't live with my dad full time. They had joint custody. But I did go to his house every Sunday. Ugh, raw deal. So he said, you know, that's your decision. And if that's a decision you want to make, we won't go through the courts. We'll just do it. So at 14, I had not only the pressure on my shoulders of leaving the church, but also of leaving my dad. And I did. And we didn't talk for many, many years. It was a decision that I think I carried a lot of guilt with me about making, but I'm not sure that I felt like I had any other option. I mean, now I look back and I go, what the hell? That wasn't my decision. He made that decision. But at the time, I didn't feel that way. So I did. I left the church. And for many, many years, I was an atheist. I knew I was an atheist. I used the label. I wasn't afraid of the label. I don't believe in God. It was a defining characteristic of me. But I didn't know any other atheists. I was in Plano, Texas. Pre-internet. I mean, the internet was there, but it was just like flash animations and like skeezy chat rooms at the time. So I didn't have a community. And honestly, it's taken many, many years. Those of you who don't know me, probably the reason for that is that I've only been doing this for a couple of years. I've been atheist for a long time, and I've been outspoken in the media about my atheism, but I didn't know that groups like this existed. And so I've been very lucky and just thrilled to be able to engage in this type of community that before was unknown to me. So, there's a point that I wanted to make there when I did leave the church at 14. A lot of people, actually I was talking to David Fitzgerald. Where'd you go? Oh, there you are. I was talking to David on Friday because we were on the same connecting leg of our plane. And he made an offhanded comment to me, something like, oh, you're lucky, or I'm always a bit envious of kids who realized when they were very young that they were non-believers and they had the, gumption to say, I'm out. And I think that it's one of those grass is always greener kind of situations, because I don't think I would wish this on anybody. I think that I'm a little bit jealous of people who didn't realize it until they were like in their 30s or 40s, when they were adults and they didn't have to deal with basically divorcing their parents. I would not wish that on anybody. And that's why I think it's important that I make the point that those of you in the audience today who are young, most of you aren't that young because I think the young ones are sleeping in, to be honest. But those of you who are, or those of you who have somebody in your extended family or friends, just the same that I would say to anybody who's struggling with coming out as an atheist or somebody who's struggling with coming out as gay, you don't have to tell anybody that you don't want to, at least not yet. And I definitely would tell you that this is a decision that's a very personal decision, and it's a decision that you have to feel safe in doing so, because I definitely know that living in the South, I know that living in communities that can be very hostile, before you're an adult legally, you don't necessarily have the support or the independence that you like to think that you do. And if you don't feel safe, you have to make the decision that's best for you. Now, that being said, I'm going to switch gears and talk about being an adult and being an out atheist, because I think that there's a responsibility in that. So, I said before, I work, I contribute to 2 television shows right now actively. I also do my podcast, and then I do a bunch of one-off TV. So a lot of those appearances that Victor mentioned were, single shows or 5 episodes here, 3 episodes there. Part of my goals in my career in popular media have been basically threefold. It's important to me to do my part to improve science literacy, and I think a big part of being able to improve science literacy is just making science more public, talking about it more often, celebrating in it, being excited about it, and being myself and being pro-science. So a girl who's tattooed, who doesn't look like a traditional scientist, owning that so that more young women and more just young people can be inspired to know that like science is cool, and rebranding the term nerd, all that good stuff. I'm also really interested in politics and social justice because I'm, a person with a brain and a heart, and There's a morality to that I think is really important. And lastly, I have in more recent years made it my mission to be very open and outspoken about my atheism. And now I think that those things are heavily connected. I think that science literacy, I don't have to do the science literacy talk because Neil took care of that for me. But we're definitely on the same page. I'm more concerned about the adults than the kids. I'm more concerned about the people who vote. I'm concerned about our ability to make evidence-based decisions in this country and not govern with, you know, Colbert's truthiness, with like our guts. But science literacy, social justice, atheism are really, in my mind, inextricably linked. Now, I get a question asked to me commonly, and I'm sure everybody in this room has experienced that too, which is like, why do you have to talk about being an atheist in public? Like, it's personal, it's private, why do you have to go there? I mean, good friends of mine have asked me this before. And what I always tell them, because I think there's a real misunderstanding, which is that somehow me being an outspoken atheist and saying I don't believe in God is misconstrued in their minds. It's twisted somehow that I'm trying to convert more heathens and I want everybody to be an atheist. I don't care. I don't care about your beliefs. I am a big fan of that Woody Allen movie with Larry David, Whatever Works. Right? In that situation, it's applied to this weird Pygmalion relationship, whatever. I don't want to get into the details. But I think the same way when it comes to your own personal relationship with your spirituality. I hate that word. Your whatever you want to call it, whatever your belief system is. I mean, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in any of that stuff. I don't believe in anything supernatural. I don't, you know, I'm a science-based thinker. Science is the study of the natural world. Anything beyond something natural is not tangible and can't be studied. Therefore, in my mind, it's irrelevant, but and non-existent. But you know, people, whatever floats your boat. My concern is when those kinds of decisions and that kind of thinking start to affect people around them, right? So this is a conversation that David Silverman and I had yesterday about Christian privilege, and it's a conversation that we had about being an outspoken atheist, that it's not really about you. It's about the people around you that are being suppressed and repressed. That for every person in this room, see, the reason that I can stand up here and the reason I can go on television and the reason I can be on the web and say I'm an atheist is because I have the privilege to be able to do that. Yeah, I'm a young woman, and yeah, I get death threats and rape threats and all the gross stuff that comes along with being an outspoken atheist woman. But I didn't grow up in Saudi Arabia. I didn't grow up in Iraq. I grew up here. I can do it, and yes, I get threats, but I feel like I'm a relatively safe person. I'm okay. I have that privilege. I think that if you have that privilege, then you also have with it a responsibility to make it safer for the people who don't yet have that privilege. And so for every one of us in this room that says, yes, I'm an atheist, this is what an atheist looks like. I didn't sacrifice a lamb last night. I'm a moral person. I volunteer my time. I give to charity. I care about social justice issues. I'm concerned about things that are happening in the world. I'm a humanitarian. I'm a humanist. That makes it that much easier for that person after you to be able to do the same thing. And it creates this snowball effect that eventually will prime the landscape so that we'll be seeing the same things for atheist rights that we've been seeing in recent years for gay rights. Because we've noticed, right? There's an exciting time that's happening right now with young millennials. And as most of you probably know, when you look at demographic data in this country, the majority of it's not like evenly spaced. Most of the people in this country right now are elderly. They're aging out baby boomers. So those people are eventually going to need to be replaced. And we are seeing that there's a young crop of people who are more liberal than they've ever been. Even young Republicans are like, gay rights, that's not like, I don't care about that. Like, of course gay people should be able to get married. I have friends that are young, like libertarians and Republicans who just, that's a non-issue for them. And I think that we're going to start to see that that's no longer something that exists on a political spectrum, even when it comes to atheism. We have a long way to go, but the way that we're going to pave that road is to be an out loud and proud Latter-day sinner. So I want to thank all of you for, like I said, drinking all that coffee so that you could make it here this morning. I want to keep us on time too. I know we got started a little bit late, so I'm happy to cut things a little short, but I would love to open up to any sort of questions or comments, have a little conversation here before I get going and before we move on to the next one. So please don't be shy, and there's mics up here if you want to come up. That would be awesome. Sorry, I should have said that. And let us know, like, your name so that I can say hi.
My name is Dan.
Hi, Dan.
And I'm doing some research and writing.
Oh, the mic's not on. It is. Oh, okay.
I should just swallow it. Okay, I'm doing some research and writing about how people of various faiths reconcile that faith, the tenets of that faith, with settled science. So I'm curious, from a Mormon perspective, how do Mormons reconcile their faith with settled science in a way that's different from other Christian denominations?
I think that's actually a really interesting topic. And just as a quick kind of primer for what I'm about to say, I have this delusion in my mind that I'm going to write a book that I've written maybe 30 pages of so far. And not my first book. It'll be my second book. Haven't even written the first book yet, about being raised in the Mormon Church. And a big thing that I've tried to do is I've tried not to study LDS from an academic perspective, from an outsider's perspective. I've tried up until this point in my life to maintain some amount of purity of thought. Like, this is how I was raised. I want to remember those things that were taught to me and not allow them to be kind of twisted by truth. So one thing that, and I can only speak anecdotally from my own experience because I haven't really studied the LDS tradition academically, but one thing that I'll tell you is that the Mormon faith is weirdly very pro-science in a lot of ways. If you look, the Mormon faith is a predominantly white, affluent religion in this country. And so a lot of individuals that are LDS are college educated, and not a small number of them actually go into the biomedical sciences or the physical sciences. There are weird ways that they reconcile. So, for example, my father and I had a conversation once, now that I'm an adult and we are on better speaking terms, and I was like, how can you not believe in evolution? Like, that's crazy. There's so much evidence. And he was like, oh, we believe in evolution. Sure. We just don't believe that evolution is the cause for speciation. So there's these weird things where, because they're not necessarily biblical fundamentalists, but they do try to find as much, they try not to have beliefs that are contrary to the Bible. So in his mind, because God, touched all these different organisms and then they sprang to life, the things that are because God made them that way. Yet, they are always evolving. He just doesn't believe that they will evolve into transitional forms and eventually into other organisms, which to an evolutionary biologist is like, that's the whole point. But so there are all these really interesting justifications that are very different, I think, than a lot of other kind of Judeo-Christian, especially evangelical Christian faiths, because there is an embracing of science that happens in the LDS faith. But there's this weird way that they try to reconcile. So maybe take that story with a grain of salt, but I would guess that it's not uncommon that other people think the same thing. No?
Hey, again.
Hey.
So I'm going to take you back to your degree. I was just, because I'm also a neurobiology major, and I do
Awesome.
research in neuroscience. So my question to you is, what in that field do you think is really going to, because it looks like it's getting popular, like what are you most excited for in the explosion of the neuroscience and neuropsychology field?
Sure. So I remember taking a history of psychology course when I was an undergrad and wasn't that invested. And this is when I first started really embracing the idea of neuroscience. And I remember one of my professors asking, is there ever going to be a unified theory in psychology? And I raised my hand in class and said, if there is, it's going to be based on neuroscience. And I think that that is the direction that we're headed, is that we're starting to understand, and this is a little off topic, but another place that I advocate really heavily is for kind of erasing stigma with mental illness. I have major depressive disorder. I take an antidepressant. I talk very publicly about it, and I'm happy to have any conversations about that. Psychiatric illness is a biological problem. It's not a mental problem. There's no such thing as a mental problem because mind and brain are the same thing. They're two sides of the same coin. And I think that we're starting to see an exciting time where that's actually an accepted principle. I also think that the big open frontier, similar to when Dr. Tyson last night was talking about dark matter and dark energy, and there's this really great, if you haven't been to the Hayden Planetarium at the Museum of Natural History in New York, right now there's a really beautiful planetarium show about things that we can't see, about the stuff that we don't know in the universe, that 95% of the universe that we're kind of don't have any evidence for really, or minimal evidence for. And I think that that frontier in neuroscience right now is the holy grail of neuroscience, which is how does mind, or how does brain become mind? And I think that as we start to understand neuroscience at the network level, which is a level that we haven't put historically a lot of time into, we know a lot about neurons, we know a lot about the cells, and we know a lot about systems, about areas of the brain and what happens when they're damaged. But network level neuroscience, how those individual cells interact with one another to arise things like personality and thought. As we start to really understand that, we're going to start to see an explosion like we've never seen before in things like machine learning and artificial intelligence. And with quantum computing, that's going to be more readily available. And so that's what I'm excited about. I'm excited about the fact that one day we might really understand how we have selves, how we become conscious, which it's not theoretical, it exists, but it's a very difficult thing to put into words, and it's definitely something that we don't understand how it occurs. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
What you said about being kind of open about your atheism and about your position even when it's unpopular really struck home with me. I've always been kind of a sensitive, easy to cry, and I recently started volunteering with the Women's Clinic, escorting patients in, down in Alabama, of all places. So it's kind of, it's kind of a nasty environment. Yeah. And as a result, it's really thickened my skin. I mean, when you get called murderer and abortionist and you're going to hell whispered in your ear in the creepiest voice you can imagine, yeah. It really thickens your skin. And I've had a couple experiences that really kind of struck home with me. One, a really bad experience. I work in a secure building. You have to badge in, and there's a guard at the gate, and yet I was verbally assaulted on the way into work. A guy ran through the parking lot at me, screaming, "You're going to hell, you baby murderer," in the doorway of a secure building. The good side of that, luckily, everybody handled it really well. We went to security for the building, we went to security at the government level, we went to security at a bunch of different levels, and even to the FBI, and everybody really took it very seriously, and that was kind of a good, even in the South, it was kind of a good reaction. The other thing, I had always been kind of, I hate those people who have bumper stickers all over their cars. Well, my car is littered with bumper stickers now. And, I've actually gotten a Post-it note left on the window of my car that says, "This is really awesome, and I'm really glad that you did that, and it scares me to do that." So I was wondering from you, what are a couple experiences that you've had that have kind of helped you get through some of those, the rape threats and the death threats and the nasty side of it?
So I think that one experience that I had recently was that I got a comment on Facebook from, honestly, I don't even know how he was on Facebook, from a young man in, I think he was in Saudi Arabia, and he said, I'm an atheist and I'm afraid for my life. I don't know. I can't tell my parents. I can't tell my community. And I thank you for the things that I've been able to see on the internet, for the fact that you can be so open. I'm not in a position where I can do that, but I really appreciate, because it helps me realize that I'm not alone. Things like that are huge for me, like the fact that we live in a global community now and that individuals who are very underground still can access that kind of information. I hope they're doing it safely. That really reinforces it for me. I'm also, it's not uncommon for me to get messages from kind of young girls, like preteen, teenage girls who, you know, look up to me in some way, mostly about science, but every so often about the atheism, and tell me I'm a role model, which is like so much pressure. But that's the stuff that keeps me going and helps me remember that I need to keep doing this, especially as a woman. Right? Because I'm actually thrilled to see such gender diversity, just diversity in general in this room. It's, in my experience, kind of rare in these kinds of conventions. And definitely when I've done stuff on air, I'm often the only woman in the room when we're having those kinds of conversations. And it's not because our numbers are that different. I think it's because there is a feeling that like maybe it's not as safe to come out. And if I can help one person feel like safe to be able to do the same thing, then it's made it all worthwhile. All right, we've got time for one more. They said one more question. So sorry, you guys, but.
Hi, I'm Lori Steinke. I'm president of Reason, a local group, and a biochemist.
Cool.
And I wanted to go back to your history of science communication. Neil deGrasse Tyson last night was saying we needed a new vision, and we need to bring the country along. We need a new culture here of scientific curiosity, essentially. How can we do that? What do we need to be doing?
So I think that there are big picture things like he was talking about. If you look at the 60s and you look at the space race and you look at trying to get to the moon, I think that if we have governmental intervention, if we put more money into NASA, but if we have large competitive conversations about that, that will help. But I'm not willing to wait for that. And I think that what's important to me is literally, it sounds silly, rebranding things like nerd and geek and science, like hashtag science, FTW, exclamation point. Like that's like really common on Twitter. For me, it's the fact that people think that like I'm cool is so cool. And so that is what I'm trying to do, is to relentlessly talk about how cool it is to be smart and be relentlessly unapologetic about reading books and celebrating in scientific curiosity. Young kids already have it. It's naturally in them. But what happens is culturally, it's so frowned upon that especially young girls around the age of like maybe 12, 13, they really start to pull away from that. And I think that if we can change the cultural landscape, that we'll see a big shift in people sticking with it. I think part of the way that we're going to change that cultural landscape is that people like myself who are lucky enough to have careers where we work in popular media have to do our part to push through programming, even when the networks don't want to, even when my executive producers don't like it, push through programming that celebrates these things, even if it's a different show. Like, yeah, I'll work on your political show. I'll just always talk about how cool science is, which is something I do regularly. So I think that's how we're going to do it. We need to reshape that landscape, and we need to never forget how like awesome it is to be excited about the wonders of the universe. So thank you guys so much. All right, so now's the part where I like shamelessly self-promote. I will be around all weekend, today and tomorrow, and I've got a merch table somewhere, they've reset me, where I'm selling my Talk Nerdy wares, which helps support the Talk Nerdy podcast and keep it free for everybody to download. So even if you're not interested in like cool Talk Nerdy gear, I would love to just meet you, stop by, say hi, take a picture, whatever. You can find me there. Thank you guys so much.